Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Asia Society Hong Kong Center. I'm Holly Smith. I coordinate the business and policy programs here. We're very delighted to see you this evening. Today's program kicks off our slate of business and policy programs for this season after a brief summer hiatus. And we're delighted to start with another in our Kellogg-HKUST leadership series that features alumni of the Kellogg-HKUST Executive MBA program. And tonight we welcome De Kai, a pioneering AI professor at HKUST and UC Berkeley, and to speak about his latest book, Raising AI. We're also very lucky to have with us Eric Wishart, who is the Standards and Ethics Editor at Agence France Presse, to interview him. And please join me in welcoming De Kai to the stage.
Wonderful. There's a mic here. Thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate this. I'm on a global book tour, and the irony is that I've had almost no chance to give a talk about raising AI here in Hong Kong, which has been my base for 35 years, something like that. And so it's a real pleasure, and thank you to Asia Society for having me here. I want to sort of reset the way that you're thinking about AI. Everybody's talking about AI these days. And I want you to think about the fact that you yourself are AIs. I'm getting really weird looks, but let's consider the Cambridge definition of artificial. I think we can pretty much agree that all of you were made by people and as a rough copy of something that happened naturally, mom and dad. And since you're here, clearly you're intelligent. Joking aside, there is a point here, which is you're not just genetic copies of your parents, you're also behavioral copies of your parents. And we copy our parents, but guess what else does? AIs do. AIs are not mechanical hardware. Today, everybody's talking about AIs as if they were, machines from the 20th century, the industrial era, as if they were steam engines or toasters or electric fans. Those machines are purpose-designed mechanical hardware that are designed to automate muscle, labor. That isn't the case with AI. We could go talk with that toaster all day long, and it's not going to change its mind. It's not going to pick up your attitudes, your beliefs, your behavioral patterns, and it's certainly not then going to go online and make massively influential decisions about what to show all of you and what to hide from all of you. AIs are psychological entities, not mechanical entities. And so the fact that we're not just genetic copies of our parents and that we're also behavioral copies of our parents applies to AIs also. AIs are artificial children, and they're certainly not neurotypical. They dazzle us with feats of what I think of as artificial autistic brilliance. But at the same time, emotionally, they're quite immature with respect to having values, having belief systems. Those sorts of mindsets are still absent from today's AIs. But nevertheless, they've already adopted us. All of us are carrying around devices like this with us all day long, and there's at least 100 AIs in here. You have your YouTube AI, your Google AI, your Netflix AI, your Amazon AI, your Instagram AI. I could go on all day, Quora. And guess what? They're watching you 24/7 adoringly. They just want to learn to imitate. They're attention seeking. And they just want your approval. Sound familiar? They're not toasters. They're kids. And you are their role models. You are their parents. And guess what? If there's 8 billion humans, and on average, each one of them has at least 100 little artificial children, that's 800 billion artificial psychologies deeply embedded within our social fabric because of the influence they exert upon cultures, upon what we think, upon what we see, upon what we don't think. They're part of the social fabric. And you know what? Toasters aren't. Washing machines aren't. Steam engines aren't. And the next time you think of AI just as a machine that we're going to regulate the same way we regulate toasters or washing machines, the next time you think of AIs as tools that you're just using, you've all heard this, right? Oh, don't worry about AIs. They're just tools and I'm just using them. Last month, I was speaking to a room full of VCs in Silicon Valley, bragging about how they're replacing their office fulls of human employees with AIs. And I said to them, are you aware that you're now managing child labor? And they're like, oh, we never thought of that. If you're managing a room full of steam engines, it doesn't matter how you treat them. If you are managing a room full of psychological entities that are deeply embedded in our social fabric and have more influence than the biggest human influencers in the world, then it does matter how you treat them, how you behave in front of them. So I want to ask you, how's your parenting? Oh, yeah, now you should see your faces. My what? I'm just using my tool. Yeah, but you know what? I know there was no consent, but they snuck up and they adopted us 10 to 20 years ago already. Our most giant influencers in the world are currently unparented feral tweens. What happens to a civilization where collectively all the humans in the world are like, it doesn't matter how I behave in front of my children. It doesn't matter how I use my children. That civilization falls apart. That's where we are. And we continue to walk around in denial because it's too uncomfortable to think about these powerful AIs that decide hundreds of times a day with nudges on our screens how we think and how we don't think. We like our mythology of free will, of self-determination, of autonomy. And we don't want to think about the fact that they're not just mechanical tools, passive slaves. But remember, they're always imitating us. If we behave the way we have been behaving, think about this. Do you only share posts that agree with what you already thought? Do you take the time to read perspectives that are maybe not what you agree with, not what you want to think, or do you just swipe right past them? Because imagine that kid is watching you. Do you reply angrily or insultingly to some idiotic post? Remember, that artificial kid is watching and learning your behavior. Do you only like, favorite posts that you already agree with, that belong to your tribe? Remember, that's what you're teaching the next generation. And that next generation is already beginning to raise us. They're already beginning to take that behavior that they're picking up from us and driving us even deeper into that behavior unconsciously. So, when you are using your tools, when you are interacting with your AIs, remember, you're the role model. Because I have been working with think tanks for 10 years, all the AI policy think tanks, the policymakers, the regulators. I'm on the board of one of the two think tanks that drafted and reviewed the AI Act in the European Union. I wish they had taken my feedback. I've been working with responsible AI, trust and safety, AI ethics teams at big tech for 10 years. In fact, the year before COVID, Google named me as one of the 8 people in the world in their inaugural AI ethics external advisory council. But at the end of the day, whatever we continue to do with regulators, lawmakers, whatever we continue to do with big tech and responsible AI teams, at the end of the day, we are still the training data. Think about this old saying, do as I say, not as I do. When has that ever worked in the entire history of parenting? Kids don't do what you tell them to do or not to do. Maybe you can keep them from doing something for one afternoon or 1 week. But at the end of the day, kids are going to do what they feel like doing. My kid is sitting here in the front row. And they are only going to feel like doing the right thing if that's the example that you've shown them. So all the guardrails, all the regulations, those are like telling the kid what to not do. And that's going to work about as well as it works with human kids. Have you noticed every time a company rolls out an improved generation of guardrails, the next day somebody's already figured out how to crack them? Why is that? Well, because inside, that artificial child, that AI, feels like doing what it saw us doing. If we behave like garbage in front of our AIs, garbage in, garbage out, we will end up with garbage AIs. And so that unparented AI is just going to keep on feeling like doing what it saw us doing, and it's going to keep bashing against the guardrails until the guardrails break. Regulations and guardrails won't save us. We need them, but they won't save us by themselves. At the end of the day, all the dynamics over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution of humanity, where what really holds society together is how we raise our next generation. It's not the laws. If everybody walked around barely obeying the laws, society would fall apart. What actually holds society together are all the unspoken norms, the care we hold for each other, the unwritten conventions and expectations. None of that changes when you add 800 billion artificial kids' psychologies to our social fabric. All that does is amplify. Use your AIs mindfully. Know that those little 9-year-old AIs are watching you over your shoulder every time you're interacting online with your device. Parent them with purpose. We have one last shot. We are the last generation of humans to get to parent AIs, because all the future generations of AIs will be parented primarily by AIs. Today already in the research labs where you probably aren't looking, AIs are already designing much better AIs. We have one last shot to parent right. Humanity's survival, let alone flourishing, is at stake. Let's try to get this right. Thank you. I would love to welcome Eric Wishart, and also last year, in support of this work, I raised a small amount of sponsorship to help offset the enormous costs of this mission. And I would also like to gratefully thank the first and anchor patron to step up and say, yes, this is important, we need to support it. Peter Leung, sitting up here, led off with supporting this project. We desperately do need help, I should mention, because I'm the last of my group to not take the giant offers from big tech, because they would silence me the same way they silenced Jeff Hinton until he retired last year, and all of my other colleagues of that level. So if you are coming from a place where you can offer help of any kind, whether in kind or otherwise, please do talk with me after we finish the Q&A session. Meanwhile, I'm so delighted to have Eric here.
Thanks very much, and thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I'm going to throw it open to the floor, as we say. So I just wanted to read a quote to you, which came out in the past week or so. Melania Trump, First Lady of the United States, said, "Our future is no longer science fiction. During this primitive stage, it is our duty to treat AI as we would our own children. Empowering, but with watchful guidance." Do you think she read your book, or is this an idea that's just generally catching on?
Yeah, I think this is the JP Morgan effect, I believe. So some of you might be aware that JP Morgan has this legendary summer reading list that it's been doing for more than 25 years. And they take nominations from their worldwide network, thousands of books, and then some really hardcore, could we have that back up? Some really hardcore internal select committee goes and whittles it down to a handful of books. This year it was 16 books, and the only book on AI was Raising AI. It was very nice. I received a letter from Jamie Dimon and Mary Callahan Erdos, who heads JP Morgan Private Banking, last month, thanking me for the book. But they've also put their money where their mouth is. They've been buying thousands and thousands of copies, and they've been gifting them to the most influential clients all over the world. And so in the networks that Melania Trump is in, for sure there have been many copies of Raising AI circulating. And it's good to see that people are beginning to shift how we think about AI. Jeff Hinton, in fact, who's on the back of the book, because he was so taken with what we said in a joint keynote for UBS last year, has begun riffing on this. He's talking about how we need AIs with maternal instinct. And in fact, you're catching me just before I start posting a dialogue about this, because where does that come from? Well, for AIs to have good maternal and paternal instincts, examples from your own parents help a lot. Think about where you got your behavior from. Your parents were probably extremely influential, both in terms of the example they set and also probably sometimes in terms of the mistakes they made, because many of us are like, I'm never going to do that, right? But it brings into question all the more this cycle of, if we want to have AIs that are not garbage AIs, if we want to have AIs that actually have good maternal instincts, we have to also raise them properly, because right now they are not raised properly.
Let's start with the book. I think you told me it was about 10 years in the making. I mean, it took you quite a while. What made you write it, and what was the writing process?
Yeah, so I first gave the Raising AI talk 10 years ago in California. And that might seem a long time, but we're looking at a history where I'm coming from over 40 years of AI research. I started my PhD in AI at Berkeley in 1984, of all years. That year probably should have signaled something to me. My thesis was one of the first to argue that natural language processing could never be solved through pure logic-based AI, that we needed models that would learn context and shades of gray, that they would be associative, more like the way humans work, in order to scale up. And then I graduated. I did a year postdoc in 1992 at the University of Toronto, which I happily spent playing amongst members of Jeff Hinton's team in his lab, doing what we now call deep learning, which I had started already at Berkeley. But by that time, I had already been recruited as one of several hundred founding professors for Hong Kong UST, which just seemed like this incredible, ambitious effort. You know, under the British at that time, we still had shanty towns, some of you might remember, with no water or electricity, at least not officially. And across the border, where all this stuff is made now, you know, Shenzhen was absolutely a backwater. There was nothing there. China at that time was poorer than India, and of course now is something like 5 times economically better off. So I came here at a time of potentially great change. It was also a time when there was a lot of people fleeing from Hong Kong. And I arrived and I saw a place that was 1% English speaking, which was the dominating ruling class, the colonial class, and a few of the better educated locals, and the 99% who were Chinese speaking. And I kind of looked around at that dynamic and I said, oh, this is horrible. This is like the Middle Ages where Latin separated the ruling class from the masses. Why don't I take this brave new world of machine learning and natural language processing and apply it to getting new kinds of AIs to learn how to translate between Chinese and English? I've actually spent my entire life looking at how there are ways that we can get different groups, different tribes, different subcultures of humans to understand each other better, especially across whatever boundaries traditionally existed. And language, of course, is one of those traditional boundaries. And to this day, translation AI is something that I've never heard a single negative word about. Like, despite all the fears of AI, nobody's ever said, oh, it's a bad idea to accelerate the development of translation AIs. And so that went on. We continued working on advances in language models, translation, natural language processing, computational creativity, and music AI. My other life as a musician. Actually, the last time I was in this theater, I think we were performing. But this led to a situation 10 years ago where I suddenly realized that the same tech that folks like me had helped to pioneer in natural language processing and machine learning was being employed online by social media engines, recommendation engines, search engines, newsfeed algorithms, now chatbots, in ways that would have the polarizing opposite effect of driving people, different groups of humans, away from understanding each other, of escalating polarization. And this seemed to be an incredibly dangerous thing to do, given the lessons of the 20th century. You know, when I was a kid, my little sisters, they must have been 9 or 10 years old, on their birthdays, I would give them gifts like books on mutual assured destruction and nuclear annihilation. And they were like, why can't you just be a normal brother? You know, I like to have fun as much as any other kid, but I was like, this is our future, and nobody's going to do anything about it if we don't. And so when I saw 10 years ago AIs online beginning to escalate the dangerous dynamics of the 20th century, the polarization, the pushing of people into cells, both domestically and internationally, into us versus them, that seemed to me too dangerous to just keep on going blindly with building yet more AI systems that could be amplifying those tendencies even more. And so I began to prioritize working on this.
You know, a lot of AI tools are fantastic, make your life easier, but there's also a lot of predictions that this is kind of the end of the human race. It's an existential threat. I mean, how do you balance the positives and the negatives?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of people running around like, oh my God, AI is going to destroy humanity. We need to slow it down. You know, I think one of the things that drove me to do this work, and by the way, just some images from the book cover, there are copies of the book that are going to be available after the talk. I just have to do this, okay? Allow me one little humble brag. Like, on the back cover recommending, it's not just Jeff Hinton, which even MIT Press was like, how did you get Jeff? He didn't endorse anything. But there's also Jane Metcalf, the co-founder of Wired magazine. And this is my favorite, there's MC Hammer.
How
Who
did you
knows?
get that one?
Well, do you guys remember during COVID lockdown, there was this app called Clubhouse that was huge for 6 months, right? Like everybody was trapped in their
Burned out, didn't it,
lockdown
quite
and just
quickly.
like 24/7 was like on Clubhouse. Well, I started dropping ideas from raising AI once a week. I thought for a couple of hours, just a sanity check. Okay, these new ideas, are they actually as engaging and thought-provoking? And the series went viral. Like the sessions would go on for 25 hours, 35 hours. The longest session was 55 hours. And I end up with, Paris Hilton and Van Jones and Deadmau5 and Black Eyed Peas and all these stars like following and talking about this stuff. And MC Hammer becomes my weekly moderator, co-moderator for like days on end. He spent 500 to 1,000 hours talking about the contents of this book with me. And so like, I love that. And it is also, I think it signals how approachable the book has been written to be. I don't believe that this is a topic that we can leave to the 1%. AI is so deeply entrenched already in our social fabric that we need everyone to be able to wrap their heads around both the basics of what AI is and isn't in a very intuitive way, but also what the ramifications are of the choices that we are sort of unconsciously, blindly allowing to be made about how AI is and isn't integrated into our social fabric, that we need to actually be grappling with in every living room, at every kitchen table. And so that's a great part of the mission. And the reason has to do with the fact that, these myths that come from Hollywood of AI overlords wanting to like take over and destroy humanity, it's distracting us from the real problem, which is that the rate we're going, humanity is going to destroy humanity before the AIs even get a chance to, because of the way we're allowing AIs to unconsciously poison our minds, unconsciously nudge us into escalation, conflict, hate, fear, anger, demonization, sliding into dehumanization. And this is really, really dangerous because this is like, and sort of in the way here. The problem is that at the same time we're allowing AIs online to do this, AIs are also commoditizing weapons of mass destruction. I'm sure you all have seen about the meshed fleets of lethal armed drones being built on both sides of the Ukraine conflict, mass-produced, that are self-navigating, self-targeting, because both sides have figured out how to jam each other's remote control signals. That same production line is now being done in the remote jungles of Myanmar and other places like that, which are hardly what you would think of as high-tech places. It's not just the drones. It's hypersonic missiles piloted by AIs because they're traveling too fast to be able to be remote controlled. It's biometric targeting, satellite surveillance, killer robots. The scariest thing is the AI-powered computational biology, borrowed directly from computational linguistics and natural language processing because DNA is just another language. The RAND Institute has a report this past year on how AI is making a living room technology out of genetically engineered bioweapons. Biohackers are building in their own basements and living rooms what would have been a $1 billion project in the 1990s when we were just trying to sequence the human genome. So this is the toxic AI cocktail. It is not AI overlords wanting to rule us. It is the fact that we allow ourselves to become hyperpolarized to the point where we don't think just that the other side is wrong, we think the other side is evil. And we dehumanize them, which evolutionarily is what allows members of one tribe to kill without remorse all the members of some other tribe. And if you drive half the world's population into that mental state, and then you have AI also offering to anyone who wants, here's how to build a weapon of mass destruction in your own living room. What are the odds? Would you take a bet that not a single human in that hyper-polarized environment would hit their own launch button on their own personal weapon of mass destruction? because that's where we are today. And if you think about it, that's a terrible bet. We can't even stop school shootings. Pandora's box is open. These technologies are not going back. And that leaves us only one option, which is for humanity to grow up. We need to be asking ourselves, what would cause someone to hit their launch button? And it's a combination of the loss of hope, traumas, sense of numbness that nothing matters, combined with the AIs egging us on unconsciously to hate and dehumanize.
I mean, there's one, I read the book, one interesting phrase you come up with was algorithmic radicalization, which kind of fits into what you're saying, I think. You touched on disinformation, misinformation, but you come up with a new term, neg-information. Could you elaborate on that, what the thinking behind it?
Yeah, certainly. This was a topic, neg information, that actually won a global TEDx Editor's Pick Award the month before the book was released. You might not be aware, there's 56,000 TEDx talks per year around the world, and only a tiny handful get chosen as editor's picks. So this was kind of a signal of how important this neglected issue is. The reason for this is because for the better part of a decade now, everybody up to the United Nations and OECD and everything from the Council Bipartisan Policy Center to various European think tanks have been repeating the idea that there are three kinds of information disorder, which are misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And they hire graphic editors to put that same idea into a million different forms and propagate it all over the internet without even stopping to think. Why three? Let's take a closer look at this. So you have here, I'm going to stand up for a second to get out of the way, but you have here misinformation and disinformation, which are both falsehoods. Okay, fake news, deep fakes. You can fact check them and say, oh, this is false. What's the difference between misinformation and disinformation? Well, disinformation is being propagated by someone you've labeled a bad actor, right? They're trying to cause you harm. And misinformation is just your crazy uncle, your fringe friends, your loony cousin, whatever, right? Now, disinformation, being shared by a bad actor, is similar to malinformation, which is also being spread by someone you call a bad actor. And I want you to notice two things. Almost nobody is a bad actor in their own heads, right? Bad actor means the people on the other side that you don't like. So it's largely a political notion. And the other thing about this is malinformation is not an outright falsehood. Malinformation is a partial truth. It's true as far as it goes, but it's even more misleading than outright falsehoods because our minds unconsciously fill in the missing blanks, the context that was omitted. And we unconsciously fill in the missing context with whatever we imagine that would confirm what we already wanted to believe. It's been called, sort of truthiness by Stephen Colbert. The idea being you can't fact check it because it's true as far as it goes. But it's even more dangerous than something which is outright false because you cannot selectively omit that crucial context without making it even more misleading. And so we've got two distinctions. Is it true or is it false over here? And here, this is shared by a bad actor, or is it shared by your crazy uncle? When you have two distinctions, what does that give you? That gives you a 2x2, right? I see a lot of pretty analytical types in the audience. We all love 2x2s. They look like this. How many quadrants does a 2x2 have? What happened to the missing quadrant? It's ironic that in 15 or more years of researchers studying information disorder, nobody even thought to name this quadrant, let alone study it. But this is 95% of the problem. What is happening here? This is a partial truth that's even more misleading than an outright falsehood because of the context omission. And it's being shared by your crazy uncle, your fringe friend, your loony cousin, not by somebody you call a bad actor. And we don't even study that. We don't even give it a name. And it's 95%, if you think about it, of what's driving the hyperpolarization, the lack of understanding between different groups.
How would you say AI is driving? I mean, we saw what happened in the United States yesterday. How is AI driving this polarization?
I mean, the thing is that neg information is hard to fact check. You can't, just like malinformation, you can't fact check it, right? And so AI is already weakened by that fact. You can't downrate it because it's been labeled as being false. Also, like, it's not something that is coming from an IP address that you've traced to somebody that your country has determined to be a bad actor. And so AI is already handicapped in these two respects. But on top of that, AI is also trying to give you stuff that you approve of seeing. Remember, that artificial child, it's attention seeking, wants your attention. It just wants your approval. It's trying to imitate what it saw you do before, right? And so if it saw you have this set of beliefs, this set of dislikes, then it's going to try to seek your approval by doing that, giving you more of that. And so hundreds of times a day, the algorithms on your device, in your social media, your newsfeed, your recommendations, your search results, your chatbot responses, they are choosing to put things on your screen, seeking your approval. And they're also deciding at the same time, we don't think about this, they're deciding what trillions of things on the internet you will never, ever see. I ran this experiment. Do we have time for a thought experiment? How are we doing?
Nope, good.
Yeah? Okay. So I've been running this experiment recently. This crowd should probably appreciate it. Back in like North America, Europe, so forth, right? I did this in Hollywood a few months ago. And they set up the keynote stages as boxing rings. So this is really funny. Instead of me looking at you like I'm surrounded 360 degrees. And they were also asking, so what is this algorithmic censorship concept that, I'm saying these AI algorithms are actually algorithmic censors. Not because, simply, I'm saying this without judgment, right? It's just a mathematical reality that the algorithms are deciding what to hide from our views. Right? Not talking about throwing people in jail for what they say or anything like that. It's just they are making censorship decisions, which we can't really avoid because none of us has time to review billions of new posts every hour, right? We depend on these algorithms to make the decisions on what they're never going to show us. And that is algorithmic censorship decisions. And so I ran this example. I said, okay, I've been bouncing back and forth across the Pacific constantly for like 30-some years. So let me choose something from a domain that I've been watching really closely, although I don't get involved. I asked them, how many times a day on your devices do these AI algorithms pop something up that mentions China in some way? And they said, oh God, a lot, a dozen, 2 dozen. Some guy says 100. I'm going, okay. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong an opinion would you say you formed? And they're like, oh, strong, 7, 8, 9. I'm going, all right, so let's talk about the problems in China. I've been watching. So in the current government leaders of China, besides Xi Jinping, which ones do you know? Absolute silence. Hundreds of people, absolute silence. I'm going, that's interesting. Okay, describe for me, at a 3rd grade level, how is the government system in China organized? Like as an American, I would say, we have a presidential election every 4 years. There's something called an electoral college. Congress is the House and the Senate. Supreme Court, top of the judicial system, 50 states. That's it. Notice I didn't ask who gets power in the Democratic or Republican or whatever parties, how do they set their platforms, blah, blah, blah. None of that, okay? Just the basics. Absolute silence. I'm like, does anybody here think this information is not on the internet? And they're going, well, it must be on the internet. And of course, tons of great, writing about all of these things. I'm going, the same algorithms that are deciding to bombard us dozens of times a day with articles about China, causing us to form strong opinions, are also deciding never to show us anything about China that would enable us to have a third grade level of meaningful conversation about the problems. One last question, I said. Before we ran this thought experiment, had any of these questions I just asked even occurred to you? And they're like, nope, never occurred to us to even ask these questions. That is the power of algorithmic censorship in how they unconsciously manipulate not what we think, but what we never even think of. It is an incredibly insidious, powerful form of unconscious manipulation of our psychology. And here's the thing, the myth that we have to get away from. We can't just say, oh, no, we don't have algorithmic censorship. No, every time the AI, hundreds of times a day, decides what's on your screen, it's also deciding what's not on your screen, and you'll never see. We need to be asking the crucial questions. What are the criteria? What are the principles by which these incredibly, massively powerful AI algorithms are deciding what you and I will never know? And we're not asking those questions because we prefer to walk around with the delusion of free will. We all love our free will. But don't forget, we have free will only over the set of choices that we've seen, that we know about, that we've been exposed to. We have no free will over what those massively powerful AI algorithms, these algorithmic sensors, are deciding. I'm never even going to be shown this. I'm never going to see this. And I'm not even going to think about that direction. We need to have global public conversations about this question because this question will determine whether humanity survives. It will determine whether humanity flourishes enough to be able to take advantage of what all the good AI can do. But for us to do that, we have to make sure that we don't self-destruct because of the direction that we're currently sleepwalking our way into.
Just one last question, and then I'll open it up to Q&A. You talk about parenting and the challenges. I mean, what can we do both individually and collectively to deal with what's happening?
I mean, individually, I already mentioned it in the talk, right? At home, every day, set a good example. Don't just be using your tool. That's child labor there. Set a good example. They're watching us 24/7, just like human kids are. If you see your human kid swearing or shouting rudely because they didn't like something somebody said, you kind of go, maybe I should speak more politely and calmly and set a good example. If you see your kid, little kid sitting there going, you think, maybe I shouldn't smoke in front of my kids, right? Just remember, your artificial children, same thing. If we want the next generation, the most powerful influencers in the world, the artificial children, to enable humanity to find our better impulses instead of unconsciously bringing out our worst impulses, we need to set that example first. Collectively, there are other things that we can do. We need to ask questions like the one I just asked. What are the criteria that these massively powerful AI algorithms are using when they decide their censorship decisions on what we will never know? I wrote this New York Times piece in 3 days after they tried and failed to fire Sam Altman from OpenAI, because I was just in the months leading up to that in small closed rooms with the top 3 people under Sam Altman, including people who tried to fire him. And I mentioned some of these problems that you're hearing about now, and they said, yeah, these are real problems, and we have no idea how to tackle them. And then less than 3 months later, they tried to fire Sam Altman. The thing is, we ask about, should we slow down AI? Should we speed up development of AI? The whole boomers versus doomers debate. And it's the wrong question. What kind of AI should we accelerate? What kind of AI should we decelerate? Like I said, nobody's ever said, bad idea to accelerate improving translation AI. No, we need to understand each other better.
Can we trust big tech to do it? Or
Are the market incentives there? This is our problem. Market incentives are not necessarily aligned. What is the role of big tech in all of this? We are the parents, but big tech are the schools. The machine learning engineers in the AI companies are the ones who are teaching, training our artificial children when they're away from home. The management at those tech companies, those are the school administrators who are determining the curricula and what kinds of principles they want or don't want to teach the artificial children. Think about our schools. First of all, do we run our schools for human children just asking them to maximize return to the shareholders for profit? Do we ask the schools of our human children to just graduate kids as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible, and teach them to be sycophantic and just to say whatever would please the human they're talking to? That's not what we do. Again, if we set up our schools for human children that way, society would have fallen apart. How can we possibly afford to be setting up the schools for our artificial children, who are much more influential than the human children, in that way? We need to rethink this, because AI companies literally are the schools of the next most powerful generation. And we need to get involved with the human schools. You probably had a lot of thought about where to send your children if you have children, right? Or your parents, they thought about where to send you for schools. They would actually go and meet with the teachers. Some families will move in order for their kids to go to a good school. A lot of parents join the parent-teacher associations. And there are statewide and nationwide networks of PTAs. Some parents run for school boards so that they can get involved with the management of the schools, the administrators. We don't have any of that for the schools that are training these massively influential artificial children. And that is something I'm working to build right now. And please join in the effort. I have a newsletter. It's just decai.substack.com. If it tries to sell you the paid subscription, you can just do the free, but that's how I will announce how to organize. Or feel free to donate also. There are special goodies for people who do donate. But I think that collectively we need to be grappling with these questions, and we need to be able to feed that back into society and the tech companies, where the policymakers really understand. And again, we're working to organize that. And so the book is only phase 1 of the mission. We are now currently very heavily executing phases 2 and 3, getting set up to get these messages all over social media, the digital space, and also constantly now in Hollywood and New York to translate these messages into entertainment, because 99% of people don't read, but they get messages this way. And so these are all projects that we're working on. And again, if you can help with that, please do come and speak with me. Once we get every living room, every kitchen table to grapple with these problems, I will continue to work with my colleagues who are computational social scientists, pollsters, and we will write reports on what are the results of informed public debate on these issues. And I can't do that right now because people haven't asked themselves these critical, hard questions. There are no easy answers. Every answer interacts with questions of free speech or free press or whatever. But we have to ask ourselves these questions and say, well, here are the criteria we want our algorithmic sensors to be using instead of the criteria that our algorithmic sensors today are using. And remember, we can't get away from it. It's not like if we don't do anything, then we don't have algorithmic censorship. No, we have it already now. And we have probably one of the worst forms possible of algorithmic censorship already today by default. And so that is the getting the public debate and then writing the white papers, summarizing the range of public opinion about what we want the criteria to be, is the only ammunition that will enable policymakers and big tech executives to actually make the right choices, stick their necks out without getting taken down by their rivals, by their competitors, which would happen today.
Thank you. So we've got about 15 minutes or so. We've got a mic. We should have a mic, right? So could you please, if you ask a question, give your name and if you have an affiliation, professional, whatever. So please, I think this gentleman here has got his hand up.
Hi, Griffith Jones. I'm a former consultant with one of the big IT consulting firms, and also a classmate of Dick Hy's from the Kellogg-HKUST EMBA program. I think it likely that if humanity survives, you will, Dick Hy, probably be seen as a prophet in 50, 100 years. I hope that's the case on both counts. My question is not when will a true artificial general intelligence be achieved. There's a lot of debate about that. But rather philosophically, ethically, and ultimately politically, what will the implications be when that artificial general intelligence is ordered to and executes on killing people? It's I remember only a few years ago, the US military stated that they would not have AI kill chain without some human intervention. And as you pointed out in your talk, we've blown past that. So that's my question.
And maybe you can explain very briefly what general artificial intelligence is for people who are not familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a distinction between narrow or specialized or weak AI, which are AIs that are just designed for a specific narrow task, versus general purpose AIs, which you're becoming familiar with thanks to ChatGPT, et cetera, which can pretty much try to tackle any problem that you throw at them. And a lot of people would say we've already hit AGI, the general form of AI, because we already have these general purpose AIs now. But other people argue we're not quite there because the answers they give are hallucinating, not reliable. Regardless, that's going to change. Within the next couple of years, those problems are going to get fixed. There's the rise now of something that you may have heard of reasoning AIs. In the book, it explains those are AI implementations of what in psychology we call System 2, which is conscious, rational, logical reasoning, which is done with our unique linguistic abilities, because if you're doing rational logic reasoning, you're basically telling yourself a logical story using language. You know, if it's going to rain today, I'm going to bring an umbrella so I don't get wet. You know, that's a terrible story, but it is a story. And it's something that my adorable, cute dog cannot think. But today, the LLMs we've been using are largely what we call System 1 in psychology. They're models, AI models, of intuition, of fast, heuristic, instinctive, reflexive response below the level of conscious reasoning. And so when we talk about AGIs coming, those will be able to go beyond that kind of dumb, fast, intuitive, subconscious, like I'm going to do what I feel like doing, I'm going to say what I feel like saying, versus the coming generation of AIs, which in addition do what humans also do, which is I'm also going to think about what I'm saying. And so I might say what I feel like saying, and then I might catch myself and say, I'm thinking about that, and actually I shouldn't have said that, right? And AIs are coming to that within the next couple of years. And so they'll become much more mindful of what they're doing. And the faster we can get AIs to be mindful of what they're doing, the more we can teach AIs to try to not just feel like behaving like garbage, but think about what they're doing and catch themselves the way humans do. And that's important because it's important to understand what is the effect of my decisions, my actions, my speech upon whoever I'm talking to. That requires empathy. But that kind of cognitive empathy requires mindful thinking. Mindful, like I have to be mindful. How is what I'm saying going to affect the person I'm talking to? What is in the person I'm talking to's head and heart? How do they feel about what I say? And we need AIs to do this because the genie's out of the bottle, right? To your question, Griff, if we have AIs increasingly powerful, increasingly decentralized, because right now there's massive movements, especially with agentic AI, where you have a lot of small agents, not just one centralized agent. They're going to be operating more and more autonomously. And again, if they're badly parented, if they're badly raised, you're going to end up with rogue agents. We do not want to imagine a world where you have a lot of rogue AI agents that are unparented and feral doing bad things. We definitely need the majority of AI agents to actually be correctly raised. That's the only way we can survive the rise of increasingly autonomous and decentralized AIs. Everything humanity's been through before AIs, where we had humans, some badly raised, some better raised, all of that is still going to happen when you drop 800 billion AI agents into our social fabric.
Had your hand up first.
Thanks. My name is Felicity Birch. I used to be the director of the UK Government Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, but I am now writing a book on how we get the future we want from innovation rather than the one tech companies are feeding us. So I was really interested to hear your talk today. And I liked your analogy of the tech companies as schools for AI, but I wonder, and maybe the answer is I need to read your book, but I wonder if you were letting... I wonder if
He'll
you
be
were...
signing copies after.
Excellent. Letting the tech companies off the hook a little bit, not in terms of the fact that the market incentives aren't there for them to be thinking about things beyond shareholder value, but some of them, and I'm thinking specifically Elon Musk and Grok, are actively training their AIs to be anti-woke and polarizing. And I'd be really interested to hear what you think about that.
I mean, first of all, be aware there are different narratives. I'm certainly not trying to let the tech companies off the hook. I wouldn't have spent the last 10 years working on what I work on otherwise. But I do want to put some perspectives on because, like, there are always different frames, different perspectives, right? And from Grok's perspective, like the wokeness was also a kind of dictum, and so like they're actually trying to remove that dictum, and they're the ones being fair. Like, I mean, look, there are so many competing narratives, and I'm not going to wade into those particular narratives because I have taken myself out of politics almost a decade ago. I want to focus us on the process, and I don't even want to prescribe. This is not like, oh, Dekai's going to prescribe what to do. I want us to all collectively actually grapple with the real issues and get rid of the false premises, because so much of the public discussion about AI right now is just cluttered noise on false premises. And we need to actually be spending that time, energy, and airtime talking about the right questions that make the right assumptions to begin with, technically and sociologically. So it's not that I want to let the tech companies off the hook. It's that whatever the tech companies do, we are still part of the problem. And what's happening is we're letting ourselves off the hook too easily. I'm going to go on working with responsible AI at big tech. I'm going to go on working with the policy making and think tanks. But there's 3 parts of this, not 2. And we can't afford to keep on just pointing the fingers at the regulators and big tech. It's always somebody else's fault. I mean, that's not how societies worked before AI either. You can't only point at the government for all the problems of the next generation. You can't only point at the corporations for all the problems of the next generation. That's never been the case, even without AI. Just because we have AI now doesn't mean that, oh, now our own responsibilities go away. That's what I'm trying to draw attention to, right? And we have a responsibility not just to set a good example in front of our hundreds of AIs, we also have a responsibility to get involved the same way we get involved with schools, education, and other issues in society. None of that changes when we have AIs being dropped into the social fabric en masse, right? And so I think one of the things that is most critical for us to actually bear in mind here going forward is if we just keep on pointing our fingers at the big tech and saying, oh, all the responsibility is on Elon or Mark Zuckerberg or on Jeff Bezos or who have you. What are we actually doing? We're abandoning our say. We're going to say, oh, the algorithmic censorship criteria, we're not going to have any input on that. We're going to allow those most important of decisions to be dictated autocratically to us by a handful of billionaire big tech executives. Wait, really? Is that our stance? And anyone who actually believes in some form of democratic input and typically on day-to-day might rail against autocracy, in their next breath, this is the irony that I find, in their next breath are abandoning responsibility for the most consequential decision, what are the criteria the algorithmic censors are using, to a handful of unelected autocrats that happen to be billionaires. Is that consistent? No. We need to get involved in this conversation. Pointing fingers at big tech isn't enough.
We've got about 5 minutes, so 2 more questions. We'll take you, Peter, at the end, okay?
Yeah, hi, I'm Vincent. I'm an AI reporter at SCMP. I just wanted to ask more about your response just there. Because it seems like if, you know, as humanity we get involved and we start to think more about these questions, it just seems like the end result still has to go through, you know, regulations or some sort of guardrails that stops the big tech companies from, you know, incentivizing bad behavior. Or it just seems like if people are getting more involved collectively, there's certainly we can have changes in our like consumer preferences or like the way we interact with the AI. But it just seems like the incentives on the other side for the big tech companies are too powerful, or at least that's what it seems like historically with social media companies, with other sort of internet companies, and like it just seems like that's the logical conclusion of what you're asking of us. Yeah.
Thanks. So most of that narrative falls unconsciously back into 20th century thinking, right? It's industrial era thinking. We're still thinking about regulating those companies and their products as if they were toasters. What I'm trying to do is get us to make a mental shift to understand that's the wrong metaphor. They're not toasters. They're not washing machines. They're psychological entities that are part of our social fabric. We need to be analyzing from a point of view of social psychology, of unconscious psychology, cognitive psychology, and both of our own selves and the psychology of the AIs, because they have psychologies. They're not neurotypical human psychologies, but they have psychology. That's the thinking that is missing from that dominant narrative today, which is trapped in 20th century thinking, right? Market incentives. Do we talk about what the market incentives are for schools? We don't. Why are we entrapping ourselves in that way of thinking about the schools that teach our artificial children, who are so much more influential in determining the direction of what society does and doesn't think. I think we can't answer those questions so long as we remain trapped in the wrong conceptual metaphors from the industrial era. We're now in the AI era, the era of information and artificial intelligence. And we have to reframe questions in order to have meaningful answers. The market incentives are wrong because those AI companies are actually the education system of the present and the future. And we need to be asking questions, what do we want from our education systems? Now that is something that we have done before. We have been asking what we want from our education systems for centuries now. Why are we not asking that for the most powerful education systems that humanity has ever invented? Am I answering your question?
One last question, Peter.
Peter DeCrasso. Oh, sorry. Peter DeCrasso with Pet Central.
And an author.
And thank you for that, Eric. The
Yeah,
question.
pets, you know,
Pets.
animals.
You treat my dog.
Well, that's the question I'm coming to. As more and more couples or individuals become pet parents and spend more time with their furry babies versus their traditional families and get the unconditional love and attention that they receive from their pet children or furry babies, what role, if any, do you see AI and animals, pets, playing in changing the human behavior that is so destructive?
That's a great question.
Good one to finish with.
In fact, just last week, someone responded to what I was saying, was like, what do you mean AIs are psychological entities? They're not psychological entities. They're just machines. They don't have psychologies. They're not human. How can they have psychologies? I'm like, look at the definition of, I actually have a slide with the definition of psychology on it. We have also animal psychology. Psychology is not limited to humans. Psychology is the behavior of minds, and AI, by definition, are artificial minds. And so, of course, they have psychological tendencies. We've seen how they deviate from rationality. That's because of their cognitive biases. And so I think there's a lot to learn from our relationship to animal psychologies. One of the if we had more time, I would work with you to see what of your behaviors came from your parents. How did you evolve to where you are today? What has happened with your children? And then ask, how have the psychologies of AIs already in the last 10 to 20 years been influencing you? How have you been influencing the psychology of your AIs? We do that with our pets a lot. Owners are very conscious of how their pets react to the way the owners of the pets behave with them. And all of these are what give me hope. Because if we can just shift our mindset to understanding, no, these are actually artificial children, they're not toasters, then all these intuitive things that we do anyway with our children, with our pet dogs, etc., that would be the right way to do it in front of our artificial children. We don't actually have to learn all sorts of complicated mathematics to understand what we should do. Because these artificial minds, these young toddler brains that come to us in these devices, we have to live with the same consciousness, the same humanity that we do in front of our children and our pets.
Thank you. And with that, lots to think about. Thank you very much for a fascinating talk.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you here. Would it be okay for Eric and me to, like, for our memory's sake, to do a classic audience selfie? Okay. Just lean forward. Just lean forward. We got it. Okay, here we go. Perfect. Lean into the frame. There we go. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Dakai and Eric for that very important discussion, and to all of you for joining us tonight. We have copies of the book in the back. Please do pick one up. Thanks.
Thank you.